Hi, everyone. I think we'll get started with the next panel, or this is actually a roundtable discussion. In case you don't know me, I'm Mike Nartker. I used to be on that side in the back, pestering everybody up here with questions. Now I'm lucky enough to work for EM. And of course, this is obviously a topic of key interest to kind of all stakeholders that deal with EM, acquisition and contract management, because as we all know, that's how the bulk of EM's work is done, is through contracts. So we have a very esteemed group up here today representing most of the major cleanup contractors as well as local officials. We have Bob Cochran, President of CB&I Federal Services, Michael Graham with Bechtel National, Greg Meyer with Fluor, Billy Morrison with EnergySolutions, and Mayor Steve Young, who is Mayor of Richland, Kennewick, my apologies, Kennewick, Washington, where Hanford is located, or near Hanford, and is chair of the Energy Communities Alliance. So we're just going to kind of jump into questions. And we want as many questions from the audience. Unlike my old job, I'm not getting paid by the question, so please jump in as much as you can. To kind of start things off, I think it's no secret that EM is getting ready in the next about 3 years to move forward with a large number of procurements at major sites. Hanford, contracts coming back up for bid, Savannah River, Los Alamos, Paducah, as we've seen. And so I kind of open it up to the panel. What can EM do in these next set of procurements to encourage a healthy level of competition? That's been an issue of some interest in the last few procurements, and to get new companies into the market and kind of offer their abilities as well. And so we'll see if anybody wants to volunteer first to answer that. If not, I'll call on someone. Thank you, Billy. Billy will jump on the grenade.
No, I think he volunteered me.
We have been in a partnering session with the department on this topic. I think most people know there's been a couple of procurements where you didn't have the competition that people thought was necessary to get the best in some of the locations. Some of the issues my company had, and I'll speak to it specifically to my company, was a lot of the profits were provisional or geared toward the tail end. So you weren't able to adequately predict profits, and so as you go through green team reviews with your corporate management, it became more difficult for them to buy into. So what we tried to do in the partnering session is take a look and benchmark at what were the really successful projects along the way, and we highlighted a bunch of those. And I think most of us on this panel, notwithstanding Steve, not sure from the community's perspective, but we like performance-based incentives, very clear objectives that can be measured, very objective measures. We kind of know the risks associated with the objectives, what our likelihood is of maximizing profits, and then we can adequately decide if we want to bid based on the team we're with, the cost of the bid, and our chances of winning. So based on the last 6 to 8 months where we've been partnering with the department, we've come up with some revision to the clauses that we consider the most problematic. Working really closely with them. They understand our issues as a contracting group. I think we've made a lot of progress on those. So I think it's getting better. We also talked about getting out the draft request for proposal on whole. I think the idea was, based on good intention, get pieces out as soon as you can, so it gives the contracting community some time to digest it. But we all felt it's better to just get the package out on whole early on. So,
anybody else? Michael?
I'll add to that, Billy. We have been working this, I think, in real useful discussions with the department. And we talk about profits. I think all of us here are committed to the mission. We've spent a large chunk of our professional careers working on this and want to see results. But, you know, at Billy's point is you just need to have the ability to get a fair return on the investment. I think there are still some barriers to entry for other companies, and it does present some issues for us sometimes, is that, you know, there's no drawdown accounts. If there's no drawdown accounts, you're working on your own cash. If the fee's paid on an annual basis, money isn't free. And so these are not large margin jobs, and that margin's further eroded by the fact that we have to fund the government in a lot of these jobs. I think the other one is these shorter contracts, and I know that's where we have good alignment with ECA. And so if you're going to spend a few $1 million on a bid, and it's a 5-and-out contract or a 3-and-out contract, it's a different calculus than if you're spending a few $1 million, and if you perform well, you have an opportunity to be there for 10 years. And so I think we're twisted up in scope definition and the type of contract and trying to shorten these when it's too disruptive, it's unproductive, and it's really a problem, I think, for the workers in the community.
Miriam?
Well, the communities actually look at these acquisitions somewhat different than the contractors, but also somewhat the same. We as communities believe, first of all, that we get the greatest amount of impact on these contracts, whether it's operating facilities or whether it's cleanup of a site. The communities are getting huge impacts from these contracts. And if these contracts are not structured correctly so that the experienced, highly qualified companies are not coming in to bid, we, the communities, are the ones that's going to suffer. It's our workforce that's on the site. It's our local businesses and businesses for the future that will come into our area. It's our tax revenue. All in all, the cities, we see the cities, especially at ECA, as the prime contractor or the prime customer to EM. And it's us that have the major impacts. If there's an incident on the site, if there's a problem with a contract, if there is media coverage and it's all negative, it's those local communities that have the greatest impact. So we see these prime contracts as critical to the future of our local communities. At Hanford, we have 4 communities that sit right next to each other, all being impacted by the Hanford site. And if the contracts are structured incorrectly, we feel the greatest amount of impact to that. And of course, I begin to hear weekly from the bargaining unit people who are doing the work, from our local small businesses and local businesses, not necessarily small, about the impacts of these contracts. So we have a vested interest in these future contracts, and with so many coming up, not just at the Hanford site, but at the other sites, where we, the communities, believe we have an important role to play in where DOE goes with these contracts.
Greg?
The last thing that I would add is we've asked DOE to look at tightening the timelines and how long these procurements take, because they end up being very, very expensive, and it's difficult for us to tie down people and commitments with our partnering companies, especially if it's a small business, if this is going to drag out for 1 to 2+ years of the entire procurement activity. So I mean, what you're seeing is more and more people teaming to share those expenses. You're seeing more and more people companies make early decisions that I don't think this is going to work for me, and they pull out because with the margin erosion that Michael talked about is all of us as business line leads have a budget that we have to work with. We can't spend the same amount of money for a long-term decision. We need to make that decision earlier, and either we're in or we're not. And so the idea that we could get that draft RFP out completely, read it, make that decision, commit to partners, and then move right or left is important. And I think that will actually encourage more companies to participate and take that first look at least.
That kind of helps sets up the next question I had, which was, with this large set of procurements coming up over the next 3 years, do you executives feel your companies have the bench strength to prepare that many proposals and to have the key personnel teams that will be needed for that many proposals going on at the same time. And if that is an issue of concern, how can that be addressed? And we'll start with you, Bob.
Wonderful. So, I would say that every company in this business is pretty resourceful. And they're also pretty strategic and tactical in how they apply their business development resources. So I think what industry does relative to the flood of procurements over the next 18 to 24 months will be reflective of the teaming strategies, the ability to resource from the parent entities into all of these, and the ability to make reasonable return on investment as it relates to the opportunities, because companies aren't going to put top-notch, high-quality people in play unless they get a reasonable return on that investment. And that's sort of how things are going. I mean, we had a survey in EFCOG, and all of us agreed to work for free, but I don't think that'll fly at the corporate levels, you know. So I think that'll be a large part of what happens.
Greg?
When you asked the question, are we ready, Bill and I said, nobody's going to say no to that question. Okay, just so you know. But I think, again, what we're seeing is there's a changing of the guard in progress. And so 5-10 years ago, everybody knew who the top project managers were, where they work, and maybe what they thought they might go to next. Many of those people aren't in the room today. And so we've got younger, really capable, really good project managers across all our companies that are out there they're working hard, they're doing a very good job. And so I think just like Bob said, we're growing things we're growing people internally. At Fluor, we're looking to bring them in from other parts of the company, say, come into the government group for a rotation to do this. And so what we're going to offer the government is good, capable people, but maybe someone that they haven't seen in action before and they don't know. But these are good, solid citizens that can get the job done.
Go ahead, Billy.
Yeah, I'll just add to that. I think the answer is yes, and Bob's right, we're all resourceful. The thing that worries me more than anything else is just the human capital in general for our industry. It's been anemic for a while, so you don't see people coming out of colleges racing to get into our industry because they don't see it as something that's viable, maybe long term. One of the things, and I don't see Frank Shepard in here, but one of the things we're doing out with the salt waste processing facility, there he is we reached out to for some military hiring, and I think we've been really successful in getting some of the military trained folks. Now, they're not the kinds of folks you're talking about, you know, that you put out on bid and proposals and things like that, but it's a niche need that we all have, and I think Frank's the project manager, but I think we're real happy with their performance out on the project. I'd encourage you all to look at that as well, because there's a large student body of veterans out there that are looking for work. Neat thing is the military will actually pay for relocation, maybe not all the way across the United States, but partially compensate, so I think it's a win-win.
Michael, did you want to weigh in on that?
I guess I have to say something. And it's yes. But it's interesting. We, in Bechtel, I think Peggy did say a little bit about the company yesterday, but we combined our commercial nuclear group, power group, with our government group, and it's now nuclear security and environmental is the business line. And that's as good as we could come up with, a bunch of engineers sitting together around the room. So, and so I've got to meet, the people who in Bechtel did, 60% of the nukes in the United States, and so those guys came in, and it was really interesting to, to see the expanse of expertise in nuclear that's brought together from both the commercial and the government side. But the thing I did notice is that the leaders in the commercial nuclear make us look young. So we have challenges with that, the whole nuclear experience, and so we're actively growing it. But it'll be a challenge on both the commercial and the nuclear side.
Yeah, I want to talk a little bit about this old age stuff you guys are talking about. Earlier, Diane was up here and she said, if you look out in this crowd out here, we're all the same age. And the guy sat next to me looked at me and went, oh, crap. So, you got to be a little bit careful. But it's not true. I wasn't here when radiation was found. But from a community standpoint, we have the same concerns, and that's one of the reasons EFCOG and ECA are talking so closely about this acquisition issue. As Billy said earlier, one of the challenges you have is finding replacements for us old guys, and it's not easy. But what we found in DOE that concerned us, and I spoke to the secretary about it, I was able to speak to Mark about it, and Monica. And you can't be talking about 3-year contracts and expect these major highly qualified companies to want to chase after them. I mean, for Pete's sake, it takes almost 2 years sometimes to get a true-up done. So by that time you get to the 3rd year and you're talking about extensions, well, they have to start preparing for the next bid. And what happens is when you're trying to hire some of these highly qualified young people coming out of school and some with some experience, they don't want to move their family to the Tri-Cities, Washington, in the desert for a 3-year contract. It's hard to get them there. The days of the 10-year contracts were nice because I could get both of my sons to want to get involved in it, and 10 years to a 20-year-old is a long time. To a 70-year-old is just not that long. But it's. I think it's important that the issue about getting a new workforce in place has to be considered when they're putting these acquisitions together. It's extremely important to us in the communities.
Well, I think Mayor Young raises an interesting point. I know there's been a lot of talk of the kids today. I don't think I can say that about myself anymore. Looking more for mobility in their careers and not wanting to stay around in places for long periods of time. And I wonder, for the rest of the panel, do you think there is some correlation between contract length and being able to get younger people in, that if you had a 10-year contract or longer, you would get younger people in who'd want to build their careers with Bechtel, Fluor, EnergySolutions and stay on that project? Or is it not enough to counter that drive of people in their 20s and 30s now looking to kind of bounce from place to place for a while?
I think it isn't that efficient to staff projects 100% at the site. It's kind of, everybody likes to have the local jobs, but if you look at the efficiency, and particularly as these jobs, we talked about budget uncertainties, so if you're staffing 100% on project and you have a decrease in budget, you lead to layoffs, right? And that's not good. And so what we've done is set up an execution center in Richland, where we have several hundred engineers that are supporting WTP, UPF, and our commercial projects. And so it provides them the flexibility and us the flexibility to manage the ebbs and flows. And we've obviously demonstrated to DCA and the government that it's cheaper to do it this way.
Anybody else? Bob?
I just want to let Steve know he looks really young compared to Bob Ferguson. That's so important. But I think the appropriate people to ask this question are the young people that are looking for careers at this point in time. I would speculate that young people getting out of school that want to pursue a career and are interested in this business area would take a job at practically any of these locations, assuming that they want to move around, and spend a few years doing project work and learning. And frankly, after they go through that, they're going to determine whether they want a career in it or whether the corporations want to make a career with them, because it's as much the responsibility of the corporations to develop their young talent and maintain it and challenge them as it is the young career people coming in. So I think this is true in all industry, to be perfectly frank.
Any questions from the audience? Okay, Chris, over here.
I
Good.
just have a comment. I don't know if anyone has seen the GE ad where some young person says, I have a job in computers, and everyone says, what's GE? It's like somehow they're trying to connect up. I don't really have a comment, but it's just, it's an interesting paradigm.
So GE has actually changed their whole HR program. If you take a look at it, they've taken all of this concept of ranking people A, B, C, the Welsh concept, and they've eliminated that. They don't do annual reviews anymore. They attract young talent, and they try to brand them into their various operating groups, not necessarily GE. So they've taken a different tack with development of young people in the industry, and they've attempted to maybe learn a little bit more from their point of view and their demographic desires than imposing what GE used to impose. And a lot of companies in that industry are moving in that direction rather rapidly, and I suspect a lot of it has to do with the industries that emerged out of San Francisco and Palo Alto and the progressive young set. So yeah, we're in for a change. We ought to get used to it.
Yeah, when I came to Hanford, prior to that, I was a Bechtel Johnson Controls individual that traveled all over the country, and I was usually at the job about 2 years. And I remember we were in upstate New York, and if you've ever been there in the winter, and you're a golfer, you'll understand this, but that first winter, all I could think about was getting out of upstate New York. And not because it wasn't good people, it was just 30 days is all they had for golf. And it takes me that long to warm up. So I got this opportunity to come to Hanford on a 90-day task order. So I had young children. I decided to move my whole family and not tell my wife that it was a 90-day task order. And
We still have one.
and so I was fortunate enough I was a subcontractor to DOE, to the Richland Operations Office. Was actually in the federal building 28 years, and now I'm with MSA. Now I can't get out of the site, in fact, now as I'm talking to myself about this, but actually working with I'm working with a great company. My point of all of that rambling was this, that in my generation, we looked to build a house, to have a home, to raise our kids in one school system. Lately, when I've interviewed young people, you're right, what I'm finding from the young people, they don't ask how much they're going to make, they want to know what their work hours are and what the opportunities for new challenges. They don't talk about promotions, they talk about challenges are. So you might be right about the duration, how long they want to stay in one place, but we in the communities want to keep young professionals in our community, because that's our future leadership for our communities, and that's what's going to build our communities, not the old guys like me.
Yeah, I'll just add, out at WSRC in Hanford, and Terry Martz is in here, but our partner on that contract, we do a pretty good job with the young people. They facilitated sessions where the young people are with the young people, and they're kind of doing things together as a team and learning and the like, and it's worked really well. Kevin Smith, who's the manager out there, when he came and talked to the board last week, he said, there probably ought to be some connectivity with some of those folks, and when you're out in the community and you're talking about all the good things we're doing, you might bring some of those guys along as well. And so it gives them ownership for not only what they're doing, but the impact to the community, and really networks them. And I think, and we're going to do that. Mark Lindholm is our project manager out there. He works for AECOM, and we'll do that. And I think that's a part of Meyer making sure that people want to stay in the community.
Yeah, I would add that a lot does depend on the community, but and there's definitely a different generation today. So I was at Pantex for a number of years, and we would hire young engineers right out of college, and to get them to come to Amarillo in the first place was difficult, and so we would target the right schools. We didn't target Virginia Tech. We target Texas Tech, and so we would get good young engineers, but after about 3 or 4 years of experience with the clearance, they become very marketable, and the big city calls, and so while my attrition rate for those young engineers was higher than anybody else in the plant, I would tell you that we kept more than half of them, and so we kept more than we lost. But it's, as we all talked about, the younger generation is looking for different things. They want, when is their next challenge? Quite frankly, what do you mean I can't have my cell phone at my desk in this office? And how come I can't stay in constant communication with all my social network while I'm actually getting paid to work for you at the same time? So there are different challenges today, and we all know that. So but it's geographically dependent, it's generational dependent, and I will tell you, our industry is not attracting the best and the brightest these days. You know, the nuclear renaissance ship set sail, and it was dragging anchor before it got out of the harbor. And so they're looking for the computers. They're not looking for the nuclear engineering or the heavy industry talent that we need. So we all have to be aggressive and innovative to find them and keep them.
To kind of shift topics a little bit, it's an issue I think that's probably hit everyone on this panel, if not many in the room, and that's if you look at EM's larger contracts, more than half have experienced large cost increases. And I'm wondering from the panel's perspective, what are the causes or factors that contribute to this, and how can this be mitigated, or probably not prevented, but at least mitigated going forward? And Michael, would you like to start with that one?
Okay, I'll jump in. I think that there's in my mind 3 principal things that drive increased cost, and that's one is changing requirements. I think another thing is the risk of the shift in risk profile. What is the owner willing to accept as risk or not? And then the funding that I think we beat to death. So I'll talk a little bit about change, and a lot of this is driven by multiple reviews. And so all of our projects get a lot of scrutiny and a lot of reviews. And so not just a whine, but what could be done about it. So DOD, we're building the plants to take care of the nerve gas for DOD and mustard gas and nerve gas at Pueblo and Bluegrass. And what they agreed to do is to focus the external reviews around, I think it's a 2-week period of time that's scheduled a couple times a year. So anybody who has an issue, a question, or something like that, it's all focused around that period of time, and there's a lot less disruption. The people that are coming to review can discuss amongst themselves different perspectives, and so it just takes a lot of work to address all these. And again, I think it's one of the things that drives change. The shift in risk profile, we're dealing with some serious things, and so I think that if you've got the high-level waste and failing tanks, that's something that needs to be addressed, and we need to get on with the mission. And so, as Peggy said, the last thing we need now on LBL and direct feed law is, okay, would this work better? I think there's 2 fundamental questions that need to get asked as you get near the end. Is it safe, and will it work? And if it's yes to both of those, it could be a great idea, but it's too late. So that's my little pitch.
Thanks. Bob?
I think well stated. Each cost increase has its own story. There's no doubt about it. And each project, it experiences something like that at some point in its project life cycle. The trick to managing it is to early understand or recognize that you're facing that type of a challenge, and to have the creativity and management talent to cycle and mitigate as much as possible in a safe way to assure that you deliver as close as possible to the original And if you use, what is it, Jim Owendorf's or Jack's approach to the two sides of the coin against the original baseline, which really is derived from the original cost proposal, which is derived from information that is provided usually 6, 9, 12 months before you get started. Not that things change in between that point in time and the initiation of the project, but if you have that and you can go back and baseline against that, whether it's regulatory, whether it's technical, or whether it's a process of some nature, you should be able to quantify it and manage it.
Yeah, I can't argue with anything you just said. In fact, in my day job, my organization is responsible for working with DOE to get the Hanford site budget ready, and also working the baseline. And in fact, there's nothing more difficult on a site like Hanford to get a complex-wide baseline done and be able to jump up in Stacy's office, say we have one, because by the time you get up the elevator, the baseline's changed. But I will say this, with the ECA, we have met with a lot of prime contractors, a lot of leadership and contractors. And one of the things that seems to slip by when we talk about costs going up is how complex the cleanup is now. If you remember back in the early days of cleanup, we took on the easier tasks first. We wanted to get areas cleaned up as quickly as we can. Not in all cases, but in most cases. Now you're getting to some really complex cleanups, and those costs are going to go up, because there's too many unknown unknowns and there's too many known unknowns. To even baseline one of those cleanup projects is difficult. And we on the community side, we believe first and foremost that if you have the right contract and you have the right prime contractor who's partnered with the labor unions, who's partnered with other businesses to get the job done, and if DOE allows that prime contractor to do the job, we believe costs will go down. If nothing else, they're going to do the best they can to keep the cost as low as possible. And from a community standpoint, that's what we want. The reality is, from a community standpoint, we want it cleaned up and everybody gone. We hate to say it that way, but that's the truth. Because, as I said earlier, from a media standpoint, we're the ones that get beat up. If costs go up too high, if the workforce has safety issues, we're the community and we're the ones that hear about it in the media.
The only thing I would add to that, Mike, is we've had some issues with supply chain on fabrication, nuclear grade fabrication in several instances. I think it's a deficiency in the things that we do, especially large vessels, things like that. Getting the type of NQA1 quality built into making those large type fabricated vessels, it's been difficult. I don't know if the rest of you have seen that, but we certainly have.
Any questions from the audience over here?
Thank you. It's not really a question. It's more of a comment. After listening to the previous discussion on budgets and listening to this, everyone understands and recognizes that having a workforce continue is very important. I mean, I am Jean Bonney, and I am here representing the Yakima Nation. And we have those same issues of continuation of workforce. So I do recognize that, and perhaps I should have said this earlier for the DOE people. I understand contracting is very difficult, but any contract that by the person completing it saves you $330 million, I would say you wrote that contract. Something was wrong with that contract when you wrote it, if they could have saved you $330 million to begin with. The other, just for doing their job. The other comment I'd like to make, and that $330 million should go back to the site it came from for future cleanup work, and not have to go back into some pool that we don't know where it's going to come from. That money should just go back to whatever site saved that much money for DOE, and that will help the contractors. I see that you're in a difficult position. But I'm hesitant to say take a 10-year contract unless there's going to be some real strong oversight as to how that contract is managed and what errors might occur during those 10 years. So, thank you.
Oh, over here.
So if I could ask, one of the internal challenges we have in the procurement process is whether or not we go to discussions. And so I was curious if the board there would be willing to comment on the value of going to discussions, which has certain downsides, extends the procurement, potentially equalizes proposals and stuff like that, versus the uncertainty that creates these overruns, which in some cases you just alluded to, of awarding a contract where we didn't have discussions. So there's a trade-off that's got to be made there, and I'm just curious what the contracting community's opinion is on the fact that DOE tries to avoid going to discussions at all costs.
So I didn't realize you tried to avoid them, but the fact is, I would actually promote the fact you should have more discussions if you want to get clarification and you want to understand the bids. There's no harm in discussions at all whatsoever. It gets you a better understanding of what the bid is. I would even go so far as to say that you ought to be selecting on the quality of the technical approach, the quality of the corporations providing it, and the quality of the individuals that the corporations are providing to deliver it, and then have a negotiation on a cost so that you can give full view into the makeup of the cost and ask a series of questions, and then make your final down select. But those are difficult things for a government entity to do because it requires a lot of trust in the process. I think you would alleviate a lot of protest in that process as well if you went that way.
Greg?
I was about to say the same thing. I think discussions are fine, especially focused discussions. If there's a question on the proposal or a clarification that the government needs to make that cuts across all the proposals, doing it in a discussion fashion is advantageous to the government and, quite frankly, to us, because we have a chance to explain really what we meant to say if we didn't say it as clearly as we should have. And then so I don't know that any of us object to discussions. Now, what we don't want is a discussion that then restart the whole process over again and take forever. So, but a discussion along the line to answer questions and clarify things that allows you to make a good decision is fine with us.
Right here. Yep.
Yeah, I'm Jim Janis, and I think many of you know I'm from New Mexico. And the biggest thing that's happened in New Mexico not too long ago is the closure of WIP, right? So going back to the title of this, contract management, I was just wondering if the companies here have changed any of their procedures, or has the closure of WIP, the incidents there, has that affected the way that you manage DOE contracts? And secondly, I'd like your opinion of, should it change the way DOE manages contracts? There you go.
Who wants to be the lucky person to take first crack at that?
So yes, I suppose all these types of incidents, you know, I could go down a long list of different events that have taken place in the Department of Energy, Department of Defense, commercial world as projects either move in a direction that aren't positive or have serious implications to, you know, the corporate delivery system or the project delivery system. They make changes. People are pretty responsive to those types of things. And so I would also submit that the government entities that are involved in those, whether it's energy, defense, interior, NASA, and you can go back to the Challenger incidents. They make changes, and they're sometimes administrative and then sometimes cultural. And so it certainly has impacted everybody in the business in some way or another. They observe it.
Within our company, and not just in response to these issues, but you've got to, if you don't learn from mistakes and trips, you're doomed. So we've established within our business a pretty robust quality council, enterprise quality council. And you talk about this stuff, but we're trying to get to quality where we are with safety. And so just as we have notifications of any injury that goes out and shows up on my phone 24 hours a day, we have notifications on quality upsets. And so in these quality meetings, the people who've experienced that get to share that opportunity painfully, and then we all learn from it. And so I know that as a community and in partnership with DOE, we're trying to learn from and get better from all these issues.
Greg, would you like to weigh in?
Yeah, I don't think it changed our basic approach to governance and contract management, but it, just like Michael said, it doesn't mean that we didn't do a few tweaks here and there. We also have what we call an Operational Excellence Council that we meet on a quarterly basis and share lessons between sites. I would tell you after the WIP event, there wasn't a single board meeting I went to in the next quarter that didn't ask for the maintenance backlog. And but having said that, there wasn't a single project that already didn't have that list prepared and said, here it is, and it was a quick discussion of where we are on it, because we all know the funding limitations. And so, have you already scrubbed it? And the answer is yes, yes, and about to. But it didn't have major changes in how we did it, but we did tweak and make sure we were looking at some of the right things. As to your second question, I don't know that I'm actually going to tell DOE that they should have managed that any differently, so I might refer that to someone in the audience to answer.
Well, I think we definitely have time for at least one more question. Anyone else in the audience? Over here.
Thanks. Brian Bradley, Exchange Monitor Publications. Several contractors have raised concerns about the length and constant changes of contracts, transfers. I was just curious as to the panel's perspective on whether the short and constant changeovers, whether you think they actually save DOE money or whether you guys think there's a better way.
Billy, you want to? We haven't heard from you.
Yeah, so think of building a cathedral. No, so I think where I started from, we have been concerned about this as a contracting community. I think everybody on this panel, and we even talked it over via teleconference with the mayor here on Monday. We talked a great deal about the length and duration of contracts and the impacts, and there are lots of them, from bid, no bid to the human capital aspect that the mayor and others were talking about. It's a pretty big deal for us. It's to Michael's term, it's the whole calculus whether we decide to bid on these or not. You put that in along with some of the non-allowables that have currently been exercised across the complex, that we were surprised by, or at least we felt it was inconsistently applied. And then you're starting to really impact not only the corporate governance and fiduciary responsibility we have, but it also impacts the communities, because as profits get taken away, then everything gets squeezed, including community budgets and things like that. So it's a long answer to say we all believe, and we're all in competition with each other, we team with each other, but I think we all believe that the duration should be not 3 years, it should be 5 and 5 and more, just to have some consistency with the workforce, stabilization, and expected profits for our companies, and stabilization for the community.
Greg?
Yeah, I was about to say that's an easy question to answer. We've been talking about that a lot the last couple of days. And just what Billy said is right. We think that longer than 3 years, and or even a 5-year with no options for extensions or anything else to do is tough sometimes. But to answer your specific question, do we think that the government saves money by constant competition? Our answer is not really, because the efficiencies that involve with bringing in a new contractor, the angst in the workforce, the change in the benefits, some sites right now we're seeing workers on strike, and so there's no question that's going to cost the government at the end of the day. So we think that a longer contract that gives the contractor a chance to deliver and stabilizes that workforce, helps the community as well, is the right way to go.
I think to kind of maybe the last question would be, we know a big priority of EM, especially now going forward, is technology development. And we heard at yesterday's panel kind of how, especially at Rocky Flats, which has been a major success for EM, how the contractor there was incentivized to bring into new technologies. And so I'm wondering, from each of the panel participants, going forward with this next set of contracts, how can technology development be incentivized, especially as Mary Young was saying, we're now into the more complex work, so you need more radical technologies, more difficult to develop, and also, as Michael said, to kind of avoid developing a novelty, a change for change's sake, something shiny and new, but that in the end may not have as much benefit as the disruption that would be caused.
Just to be clear, Rocky Flats, the use of technology was early on, but also abandoned in many cases because the use of technology didn't necessarily get the job done. Innovative and creative processes and use of the workforce were the trick at Rocky, more so than innovative technology application. And then I would always say that technology application appropriately used is certainly a great tool. And demonstrating it and using it and making sure you have the right readiness reviews for its application and scaling it right prior to application is an important aspect. But creativity works better than just simply technology.
Very good.
From the community standpoint, we take a lot of pride in our local laboratory, P&L, and the technology that gets developed through them. And certainly we like to see new technology developed through our prime contractors at the Hanford site. But from a community perspective, what we're more interested in is the creation of new jobs, bringing in new companies to our area, developing new companies in our area, whether it's through technology or anything else. So from a community standpoint, what we're looking for is the future. We're always talking about where we go from here. And going back to this short-term contracts, for us in the community, a 3-year contract really does not incentivize a prime contractor to partner with the community. It just doesn't. A 5-year contract with another 5-year extension, now that opens that partnership up because now they become more ingrained in the community. That's part of their lifestyle now. And it's the same way with bringing new businesses in. It's easier to get a new business in that's going to service a prime contractor, a successful, well-known prime contractor. And that company normally will stay in that community. It may downsize decades later, but it remains as part of our community. So from a community perspective, that's what we're after. It's not so much the technology as it is the new businesses.
Yeah, I think Kevin Smith yesterday talked about how he's trying to get technologies inserted into WTP. I think it takes that kind of a focused effort. It sort of brings me back to, it's been 20 years, but we did technology roadmaps under Moniz, and you had an opportunity to engage with the labs in your challenges and lay out when did you need the technology. And so I think there has to be some funding set aside at headquarters, like Mark Gilbertson talked about yesterday. So Mark was in this program years ago and knows that clearly we don't have enough walking around money for creativity and technology within the program now. And so I think what they're trying to do is really admirable, and we need to support it.
Great.
I guess I was just going to say along the same lines, Savannah River National Lab had a great pitch yesterday where they've saved potentially $10 billion across the complex, and so I think the mechanism is there. I think, as Michael just said, we need to make sure that mechanism is funded. I think the current contracts are already sufficient to incentivize us for cost savings, because it's, at the end of the day, if we can save money on our contract, most of that money, if it's in the current contract, does go back to the contract we're executing. That means we can get more work done. We do better off in satisfying the customer and then in competing for the next work. So I think we have sufficient incentives right now. And those breakthroughs are just as Bob said, there's a lot of balancing back and forth. I was at Rocky Flats when we did some of those technology investigations. And in some cases, by the time you investigate the technology, studied it, did a risk assessment, bought the first one, ran a pilot, decided it was okay, and then you're ready to go for real, the Sawzall could have cut up 10 glove boxes. And so, there was a lot of that going on. So there is a balance between high tech and low tech, but the contractors, I think, are sufficiently incentivized today to figure out where that balance is.
Well, I think with that, we'll say thanks to the panel. And I know next up is lunch, and we'll be back at 1:30. To come back we'll resume back at 1:30, correct? Okay. Thank you.